The movie begins with Heathcliff thrashing around a room. On the walls, there are many drawings and childish carvings of farms and birds. There is also an etching of their names on one of the tables. This room used to be Catherine's room, and Heathcliff is in despair upon knowing her fate. To know why the man is in such a state, let's turn back the time to where it all began. One fateful rainy night, Mr. Earnshaw brings home a scraggly-looking boy, much to the astonishment of his children and servants. The boy is dark-skinned, has a sulking expression on his face, and has no good manners whatsoever. But Mr. Earnshaw has taken pity on him, enough to bring him home. He says it's the most Christian thing to do. He orders Nellie, one of the servants, to clean up the boy. Nellie soon finds out that the boy is ill-tempered, with only impertinent words coming out of his mouth. But Nellie perseveres, and she manages to wash the grime off his body. It also helps that the boy is distracted when he sees the younger Earnshaw sibling, Catherine, peeking at him through the gap at the door. The next day, the boy wakes up to dogs sniffing him. He gets up and looks at the hills surrounding the house. The place seems isolated, with a dreary atmosphere enhanced by the mists. He sees Catherine outside. Then, Hindley, the older brother, enters the room, followed by Mr. Earnshaw. The man pats the boy's head, a gesture akin to a father greeting his son. That's when he realizes he's not going to wander along the streets anymore. Once the sun is fully up, one can see that the Earnshaws are living in a lone farmhouse, surrounded by sprawling farms, hills, and grasslands. But this isn't some type of an aesthetic. The place is as bleak and gloomy as it can be. Mr. Earnshaw is a farmer who manages his lands well, and that's how he can keep up the estate. The boy sees Catherine sitting on a dry stone wall. Just as he's about to walk up to her, a horse suddenly cuts his way, almost knocking him out. Hindley, the horse's rider, has no remorse over what he did. Catherine runs up to the boy and asks if he's okay. Seeing that he has no physical injuries, she invites him to go horseback riding. They ride up the gentle slopes of the hills, with the wind blowing against them. Catherine's hair gets blown onto the boy's face, and it's the most fragrant thing he's ever inhaled. The short ride is bliss, far from his previous homelessness. Once they reach the rocky part of the hill, they get down and simply watch the sun as it sets. In the next scene, we see Catherine teaching the boy different types of birds based on their feathers. She also teaches him how to pronounce their names. Since the boy had no form of education prior to his arrival, his pronunciation is almost unintelligible or funny sounding. Catherine laughs at this. However, the boy is not a total imbecile. In fact, he is a fast learner and intelligent enough to understand his situation. That night, he gets glimpses of Catherine changing into her sleeping gown. When she invites him to sleep beside her, he accepts. There's innocence in this gesture, yet the intimacy is undeniable. It's through these small moments that their feelings for each other blossom. Soon, Mr. Earnshaw brings the boy to the church to get baptized. When the priest asks for the boy's name, Mr. Earnshaw replies it will be Heathcliff. Then it's time for his head to be dipped into the basin of holy water. But Heathcliff doesn't understand why he has to, so he runs out of the church. Seconds later, Catherine finds him hiding behind the dry stone wall. She leads Heathcliff away from the church. Together, they run through the mist-filled moors. Catherine is a free soul, often running wild in the fields without adult supervision. She has no nanny, no governess, and so she has not learned the concept of being a proper woman. Even with Nellie, the servant can only impart a few points for right conduct. There is something wild in her, something unrestrained, and perhaps it's this something that keeps Heathcliff attached to her. She's far from being kind, but she's the only one with whom Heathcliff can feel equal. The two return to the farmhouse in the afternoon. There, Mr. Earnshaw gives his daughter a slap on the face. Then he grabs Heathcliff by the collar and tells him he doesn't want to see him that night. It seems like Mr. Earnshaw's anger abated the next day. He smiles at Heathcliff as he asks him to choose between the brown horse and the white speckled one. Heathcliff chooses the latter. With Catherine guiding the trail, he rides the magnificent beast. Heathcliff discovers it's not easy to control the horse, and he gives up soon. He walks back to the barn where Hindley is tending to the other horse. Heathcliff demands that he give him the horse, as he thinks it's easier to tame than the other one. Hindley tells him to bugger off. Heathcliff threatens him, saying he'll tell Mr. Earnshaw what he's been doing to him. Annoyed, Hindley punches Heathcliff. Ever since the boy came, Hindley has never liked him. That night, Catherine checks Heathcliff's chest for any bruises. She knows about her brother's cruel attitude. She apologizes to him on behalf of her brother. The next day, Heathcliff witnesses Mr. Earnshaw punishing Hindley after learning about his maltreatment of Heathcliff. No doubt, it's Catherine who told him about the situation. Mr. Earnshaw says he raised his children to be good Christians. Therefore, he had hoped Hindley would treat the boy like his brother. But Hindley is defiant in saying the boy is a gypsy, not his brother. This earns him painful hand swats from Mr. Earnshaw's stick. Heathcliff can see Hindley is suffering from his punishment. Mr. Earnshaw reminds him not to feel pleasure about what he has witnessed. But it's not pleasure the boy feels, it's vindication. A few days later, changes happen in the Earnshaw household that make life a little bit easier for Heathcliff. Hindley departs for university, where he'll stay for a few years. After that, Heathcliff feels lighter now that his life's antagonist is gone. His bond with Catherine grows stronger. Most of the time, they run off to the moors during those misty days. There, they frolic in the mud and slap dirt onto each other until they are both on the ground. Even if there are no words said between them, they understand that their feelings for each other are mutual. Through their childish play, they can express the emotions blossoming in their hearts. Mr. Earnshaw sees them in their dirty clothes and admonishes both of them for being filthy. He's especially hard on Catherine, whom he sees as a wild child with no proper manners for a lady. He tells her he regrets the day she was born. In the house, the two children change clothes together. There's no inhibition in their movements, as they're too innocent to dabble in worldly desires. For Heathcliff, it doesn't matter if Catherine acts like a vagrant. He loves her, and she's perfect in his eyes. One night, as they all sit by the fireplace, Mr. Earnshaw asks his daughter to sing for all of them. When she's done, he asks her why she can't be a good girl. In response, Catherine asks her father why he can't be a good man. No one expects that this will be the last interaction between father and daughter. For later that night, Mr. Earnshaw will pass away. The next few days are spent in mourning. Catherine spends most of her time beside her father. Meanwhile, blissful days are over for Heathcliff. One day, Hindley returns to take on his role as the new master of the house. To the delight of everyone, he's brought home a wife. Her name is Frances, and she greets Catherine warmly. However, Hindley orders Heathcliff to take their luggage and bring it inside the house, and then bring his things to the animal barn, where he should stay. Education has not dimmed his hatred for the boy, not even in the slightest. And now that he's the master of the house, he's in a perfect position to cast Heathcliff out. Catherine watches, secretly wishing he would choose to stay, and it seems like he has hurt her. He can endure the mistreatment as long as he's close to her. Soon, Mr. Earnshaw is finally laid to rest. During the interment, Heathcliff meets their closest neighbors, the Lintons, who have come to pay respect to the deceased. They see Heathcliff, the black boy whom Mr. Earnshaw has taken in, and mistake him for one of the servants. That's what Hindley wants, for people not to see the filthy gypsy his father brought home as their equal, and he'll make sure of it. He has already made Heathcliff sleep in the barn. He might as well make him a servant of the house. In the next scene, we see Heathcliff pounding stones for the dry wall they are building. When Catherine calls his name, he immediately abandons his post to go to her. Joseph, another servant of the Earnshaws, calls him out and wishes for both Heathcliff and Catherine to go to hell. To this, Heathcliff replies, "See you there." As usual, the two children play around the grasslands without a care in the world. But when they return, Joseph is already waiting for them. Hindley restrains his sister from stopping Joseph. Catherine tells her brother he's a hateful man. If their father is still alive, he would be ashamed to see him become more cruel. The next day, Heathcliff escapes from his work again. Catherine finds him on one of the hills, looking forlorn. She checks his wounds from the beating yesterday. Heathcliff feels comforted and aroused. After she's done, she remains seated by his side. The silence between them is far more soothing than any words they could ever say. A few minutes later, Catherine notices the big house a few miles from their position. That must be where the Lintons reside, as they're the only neighbors they have in that area. Catherine challenges Heathcliff in a race towards the house. Together, they run towards the property. It's already nighttime when they finally reach the hedgerows surrounding the mansions. With Catherine leading the way, the two walk up to one of the mansion's windows. It's clear that the Lintons are more opulent than the Earnshaws. Catherine and Heathcliff see two youths arguing about a dog. They recognize them as Edgar and Isabella Linton, who came to Mr. Earnshaw's burial before. Isabella turns around and gets frightened when she sees them. She shouts for her father, and soon after, a hound is sent out to chase them. The dog manages to catch Catherine by the ankle. The servants bring Catherine inside, with Heathcliff just right behind. One of the maids recognizes Catherine, who has a reputation for running wild. And by association, they also recognize Heathcliff, the stowaway picked up by the late Earnshaw. The Lintons are not ashamed of disparaging Heathcliff, to which he retaliates by calling them derogatory terms. This causes him to be thrown out of the mansion. But he doesn't leave just yet. He peeks through one of the windows. He sees Catherine immediately cozying up to the Lintons, especially with Edgar. It's as if she has forgotten about him. When the doctor arrives, Heathcliff understands that Catherine will be taken care of. He returns home. Days and weeks have passed, and Catherine has not returned. As it happens, Hindley has allowed his sister to stay at the Lintons for longer than warranted. He thinks it's a good idea for his sister to live with more civilized people. Unlike the filthy Heathcliff, she can learn proper manners and be dressed as a lady befitting the Earnshaw household. This setup means no one will come to Heathcliff's rescue if Hindley or Joseph beat him up. In addition, Heathcliff warns him to never approach his sister when she comes home. The moors, always a dreary and bleak place, become more unbearable without Catherine's unrestrained laughter and stubbornness. Yet, Heathcliff pushes on, hoping that one day she will return. There are nights when he secretly visits the Lintons. From the window, he can see that Catherine is doing well, seemingly healed from her injuries. That is at least a solace in his surly heart. And then, one day, Catherine comes home. Everyone in the household is happy for her return. For the first time, we see Heathcliff genuinely smile. He hears her looking for him, so he enters the parlor, where everyone is gathered. Then he gets shocked. Catherine looks different. She's now dressed in a pretty and clean frock. Her usual dirty face is now free of mud, showing off a healthy radiance as a result of proper care and hygiene. Her usual unruly hair is now tamed and styled elegantly behind her head. Catherine is truly glad to see Heathcliff again, but the latter doesn't feel the same way. For Heathcliff, it's like the Catherine he knew is now gone, replaced by this pretty stranger who claims to know him. He feels offended when she smiles at him, thinking she's making fun of his dirty clothes. He looks around, and he can feel everyone's scathing look. Feeling out of place, he runs out. Nellie finds him in the animal barn. She has sympathy for him, and she understands that he felt belittled by Catherine's return. She offers to clean him and dress him up, but he refuses. Every night, he watches Catherine from the barn through the window, and he can see stark changes in her. She's now acting more ladylike. Gone is the unruly girl who would bring him to the hills and throw mud at him. The resentment in his heart slowly turns to admiration. He realizes he also wants to be good like her. Eventually, he asks Nellie to help him clean and dress up. Nellie is happy that Heathcliff has finally come to his senses. After a few washes and scrubs, and after donning presentable clothes, Heathcliff feels lighter and happier. Nellie compliments him, saying he must have gotten his good looks from royalties. She reminds him that Edgar Linton is visiting Catherine today, so looking presentable is a must. He waits around the house's corner as the Linton siblings arrive. Catherine greets them cordially, but Heathcliff notices that she's particularly close to Edgar. Heathcliff enters the dining room to join them. Catherine is especially surprised at how gentlemanly Heathcliff looks. However, Hindley pushes him out of the door, and Edgar scathingly remarks that he looks like a dressed-up circus monkey. Heathcliff responds by throwing sauce at Edgar. Hindley pulls Heathcliff out of the house. Catherine severely admonishes Edgar for insulting her friend, then runs after her brother to stop him from beating Heathcliff. Hindley is taller and much stronger than Heathcliff. All the latter can do is curl up to defend himself. When Hindley stops, Catherine crouches over him, worriedly checking for bruises. But her brother pulls her away, just as Joseph comes to see what the commotion is about. Hindley orders Joseph to lock Heathcliff up in the barn. That night, the boy looks more sullen than ever. He angrily throws his clothes away, opting to stay for the rest of the night. He understands that no matter how clean or how well he dresses, he can't change his savage nature, and people will always see him as the stowaway gypsy who should never have been brought there. Later, to his surprise, Catherine comes to check in on him and bring him food. Indeed, she's the only one who comes to him and genuinely shows him care. It's like she's his anchor to sanity. Several months pass by without much incident. Heathcliff continues to labor under Hindley's order. The Lintons have not visited again. Catherine maintains her posture and is now helping France during her long walks. France is pregnant. Any moment now, she might give birth. One day, Heathcliff observes Catherine and Francis walking when, suddenly, Catherine runs to them and orders them to fetch the doctor quickly. Frances is about to give birth, and only Nellie and Catherine are around to help her. Heathcliff has no idea what to do, so he remains a few paces away from them, listening to Frances' excruciating screams of pain. The baby boy is born healthy and strong. However, not long after, Frances kicks the bucket due to complications. The Earnshaws bury yet another one of their deceased. Heathcliff sees Hindley crying for the first time. He did love his wife, no matter how cruel he could be. Of course, the Lintons are there to offer their condolences. Heathcliff recognizes Isabella, who would sneak a peek at him. Francis' passing brings about changes in the household. First, Hindley becomes neglectful of his duties to maintain the estate. He's slowly getting addicted to vices, which Mr. Earnshaw, if he is still alive, will gravely disapprove. Next, Edgar is visiting Catherine more often now. Heathcliff sees the two riding their horses together. Sometimes he sees Catherine looking at him, as if gauging his reaction. But Heathcliff is as sullen as always. In the next scene, Heathcliff enters the room. He finds Catherine getting dolled up with the help of Nellie. He asks where she is going. Catherine doesn't answer the question. Instead, she changes the subject by asking him why he's not working. Heathcliff only says Hindley will never know, and he's correct about it. In fact, Hindley isn't in the house most of the time. His son, Hareton, who is already a toddler, only gets the care he needs from Nellie. When the servant carries Hareton out of the room, Heathcliff tells Catherine how she's always spending time with the Lintons lately instead of him. Catherine doesn't notice it at all, because to her, it doesn't make any difference. But to Heathcliff, it does. He's starting to feel jealous and have a sense of abandonment. Catherine questions why he would complain now. To this, he responds she never complained before when he did. Their conversation gets cut short when Edgar enters the room. Heathcliff realizes that Catherine is making an effort to make herself prettier for Edgar, and not for him. He runs out of the room, brooding with all his hurt upon his realization. He even sees her wooing Edgar back to the house, as if she's oblivious to hurting his feelings. That night, as Heathcliff sleeps peacefully on the floor, he is awoken by Nellie entering the room while carrying Hareton. She's cooing at the baby when Catherine follows, seemingly troubled by something. They are not aware that Heathcliff is awake and listening to their conversation. Catherine reveals that Edgar has proposed to marry her, and that she has accepted his proposal. Edgar is cheerful, handsome, and rich, and they love each other. And yet, Catherine is crying because somewhere inside her, she feels wrong. She confesses that she has always been in love with Heathcliff. If only Hindley didn't make him a servant, she wouldn't even be thinking of marrying Edgar. But Heathcliff is of low rank now, and Catherine needs to marry well to secure her future. Her only regret is that she won't have the chance to tell him how she really feels. Deeply hurt by this revelation, Heathcliff crawls into the kitchen and goes out into the barn. He gathers whatever belongings he has. Just as he's about to leave, Catherine discovers him. She calls him in despair, but he doesn't give her a second look. Then, Heathcliff disappears into the night. Years have passed since that fateful night. One foggy day, Heathcliff returns to the farmhouse. He's a changed man now. Gone are the dirty clothes. He looks more gentlemanly, and speaks that way, too. It also seems like he has earned a small fortune for himself. He continues to walk towards the building, which now looks derelict. No one responds to his knocks, but a small boy runs out of the corner. This is Hareton, and he looks neglected. Heathcliff turns around the corner to find Hindley barfing. Time has not been kind to him. His face looks sunken, and his skin seems to have not seen the sun for a long time. But Heathcliff has no pity for him. He asks where Catherine is. Hindley says she married Edgar, and is currently living with the Lintons. Sensing an opportunity, Hindley offers him a room inside the house for a cheap price. Heathcliff ignores him. Instead, he goes straight to the Linton Manor. This is the first time he visits the property during the day. He passes by a small orchard, where he sees Nellie. Catherine took her as a servant after marrying Edgar. Nellie is pleasantly surprised to see him again, but he cuts to the chase, and, in an almost demanding manner, asks for Catherine. In a few minutes, he's face to face with the only woman he's ever loved. Catherine has grown into a lovely woman. Gone is the unruly girl who would run wild in the moors. She's more ladylike, but still has a hint of stubbornness in her eyes. She smiles as she welcomes Heathcliff. When Edgar calls her to invite their guest in, she beckons him to follow. Catherine is now the lady of the house. As Heathcliff is led to the parlor, he hears her telling her husband to behave and to treat him better. But Edgar warns her not to be frivolous and never allow the servants to realize her close relationship with Heathcliff. Yet, she doesn't listen. It's been so long since Catherine saw him. All her pent-up emotions threaten to come out. Meanwhile, Heathcliff remains as calm as possible. He tells her he only has one goal in returning to get her back. His life has become more bitter since he left, but now he's never going to leave her. This makes her too emotional, because she strongly feels the same way. She has to remind herself to mind her manners. She's a married woman now, but her feelings for Heathcliff never left her. His return makes her realize her feelings only grew stronger throughout the years. The visit is short and direct. That night, he returns to the farmhouse to accept Hindley's offer. Just as he suspected earlier, the house has been neglected. Hindley has no priorities other than conducting gambling inside the house. He enters Catherine's room, where Hareton is sleeping. It's the only decent room left, and he has no pity for the boy. He evicts Hareton from the bed and claims it. The next day, while he shaves, Hindley approaches him. He accuses Heathcliff of stealing because he can't fathom why he suddenly has a small fortune. Then he realizes he's the only one who can give him money. So he tells him he needs the rent in advance. Heathcliff provides it to him. He doesn't care about Hindley, or the boy, or the house, because to him, Hindley will always be the smaller person. Catherine arrives at the farmhouse, with Isabella tagging along. It's Edgar's idea to make her sister tag along. The trio rides their horses towards the grasslands. Upon arriving at a stony hill, Catherine orders Isabella to stay behind, as she wants to show Heathcliff something. Then she walks on. Isabella asks Heathcliff to help her get off her horse. He does, then immediately turns around to follow Catherine, leaving her disappointed. Up on the hilltop, Catherine confronts Heathcliff. She pushes him, then steps on his face. She feels she deserves to do that to him. Thankfully, Isabella calls them. The next day, Heathcliff visits the manor again. While waiting, Isabella greets him. She is also happy about his return. You see, she's been smitten with him since they were young. She thinks that, perhaps, she can have a chance with him, now that Catherine is already married to her brother. But her hopes are crushed because Heathcliff remains cold to her. In addition, Catherine won't let her come between them. In an act of transgression and defiance, she wears her shoes in front of Heathcliff, allowing him to see her ankles. The Lintons are also there witnessing her behavior, but they're too timid to reproach Catherine. In the end, Isabella chaperones them again. Catherine humiliates Isabella for being too nosy. In response, Isabella forces Catherine to reveal the big news to Heathcliff, which annoys her. It's not lost on Heathcliff that Isabella implies Catherine's pregnancy, but he doesn't mind. In the end, he knows Catherine will belong to him. On his third visit, Catherine humiliates Isabella again by revealing her feelings for Heathcliff. Isabella scratches her sister-in-law before leaving them. Catherine has become vindictive and selfish. She doesn't want Isabella to have what's rightfully hers. Meanwhile, a lot of things are going on inside Heathcliff's mind. He's still hurt by the fact that Catherine has married Edgar, and so he wants to enact his revenge, and Isabella will be the best tool for that. On his next visit, he finds Isabella feeding the birds, taking advantage of her feelings for him. He kisses her, making sure Catherine can see them. Later, when he enters the house, Catherine demands to know why he did that. He tells her she's treated him badly and has no right to be jealous. He's not her husband. He also adds that she can never be nice. Hurt by his words, she slaps him. Just then, Edgar enters. He reproaches Heathcliff for always coming here because his wife favors him. But enough is enough. He makes his wife choose between him and Heathcliff. Distressed, Catherine cries that her husband's veins are full of ice. This prompts Heathcliff to attack Edgar, and an altercation ensues. Once Edgar is down, Heathcliff offers Catherine to run away with him, and to raise the child as his own. But she's so heartbroken by his betrayal, she orders him to leave. Heathcliff immediately leaves the building, but that night he comes with a vengeance. He tricks Isabella into eloping with him. He wants to cause the Lintons as much pain as possible. The two elopers run into the night. A few weeks have passed. Heathcliff and Isabella return to the farmhouse, now married. Joseph is still there, and he is horrified to know that the gypsy servant has married. Heathcliff follows him to the barn and asks for any news about Catherine. Joseph reveals that Catherine has become sick since Heathcliff left. She spent the previous weeks in fever and delirium. Heathcliff immediately grabs a horse and rides toward the Lintons. However, he finds it impossible to sneak in. Therefore, he can't see Catherine. As days go by, Heathcliff waits for news of Catherine's recovery. On the other hand, Isabella suffers. She now realizes she was only a pawn in Heathcliff's plans. Every day with him is filled with suffering. But Heathcliff can't wait any longer. He rides back to the Lintons and manages to enter the house without anyone seeing him. He goes straight to her room. There, he sees her looking pale and frail. He runs to her and hugs her tight. Catherine is surprised and relieved to see him, but her heart is full of vindictiveness. She blames him and Edgar for her condition. Yet, she begs him not to go. Finally giving in to his feelings, Heathcliff returns to her and holds her tight. All the unsaid words, the buried feelings, they both release them through that hug. They could have been together, but their circumstances and decisions prevented them. Then, Catherine faints just as Edgar arrives. Heathcliff gives her to him and begs him to help her. Unfortunately, Catherine has breathed her last. Heathcliff is in agony as Nellie relays the news to him. This brings us back to the start of the movie, where he thrashes around inside Catherine's previous room. He can't believe she just left him like that. With no more conscience in him, he returns to the Lintons to have one last look at her corpse. And then he does the immoral, unthinkable deed. But even this is not enough. Even after Catherine is buried, Heathcliff still yearns for her. He runs to her grave, digs up her coffin, and attempts to open it. However, he doesn't continue due to the impending rain and his hallucination of seeing Catherine's ghost. He returns to the farmhouse, but Hindley and Isabella have locked him out. Already out of his mind, Heathcliff kicks one of the windows and starts a brawl with Hindley. He fights him, with all the years of suffering packed into his punches. In the end, he overpowers him. He almost gets Isabella, but decides to spare her. In one last act of defiance, she scorns Heathcliff, telling him he's the reason why Catherine passed away. She hates him with all of her heart, and with that, she runs away. Hareton, the poor boy, witnesses all of this unfolding, and bless him for his innocence and ignorance. By the end of the movie, Heathcliff becomes the legal owner of the Earnshaw estate. With that settled, he takes a walk back to the grasslands, the only witness to the pure love he once had.